They say the mountains are quiet, but that's not true. Not if you listen closely. Out here in the Absaroka-Beartooth wilderness of Montana, silence is layered. Wind slips between trees like breath between words. Pine needles whisper, streams murmur to themselves. Birds hold short, secret conversations above the canopy, but that day I heard something else. Something I hadn't heard before. It was mid-November. The last of the yellow had fallen from the cottonwoods, and frost stitched silver lines across my porch railing each morning. I had just come back from my usual walk 2 miles into the timberline alone, same route I'd taken for years. Living out here by choice comes with its rhythm. You learn to keep your own company. I was filling the kettle when I heard it faint, almost swallowed by wind. A short, broken sound. Too soft to be a bear, too wild to be a bird. I froze. Waited. There it was again. I stepped out on the porch, boots scraping against the old wood. Nothing in sight. No rustling, just the thick hush of snow-dusted trees. That's the thing about wild animals, they don't announce themselves. Not really. They test the air. They watch from the shadows. I stood for a while, scanning the edge of the forest like I used to back when I was still a ranger. But that was a different life. That was before. Before I moved out here, before I lost someone who made silence feel less empty. Now I just listen out of habit, or maybe hope. The next day I walked the same trail slower this time. No music in my ears. Just the creak of snow underfoot and the occasional snap of a frozen branch giving in. That's when I found the track's small, clumsy prints in a staggered line. Not deer, not wolf, bear, but not a grown one. Cub-sized. I knelt. The pads were barely formed. The gait is unsteady, and they weren't heading anywhere fast, just wandering, circling, looping back on themselves like the little thing didn't know where to go next. Grizzly bear cubs aren't supposed to be alone in November. Their mothers are still with them, tucked away or teaching them to prepare for the long winter sleep. This one was out here wandering. That's when I felt it, not just curiosity. Concern. A tug low in the belly, like something inside me recognized that this little life shouldn't be alone. I didn't do anything dramatic. I didn't go chasing after him or calling wildlife services. You don't do that unless there's a clear emergency. I just started paying closer attention, and for a few days I heard nothing. Then one morning, while splitting kindling near the tree line, I saw movement. A blur of brown, just a flash behind a stump. Gone as soon as I turned, but the size, it matched the tracks. I left a few soaked oats at the edge of the woods. Just enough to say, I see you. If you're hungry, it's okay. I didn't expect much. Bears don't stick around for humans. Not unless they've learned to fear less than they should, and that's not a good thing, not for them or for us. Still, the next day, the food was gone. Here's the part people misunderstand. Wild animals don't ask to be rescued. They don't come begging. They don't perform for the camera or sniff your hand like in cartoons. What they do if they trust you is appear, briefly, then vanish, like dreams that fade when you wake up. It took 4 days before I saw him properly. He didn't step into the clearing so much as pause halfway in. About 20 feet away, head low, eyes wide. Fur is scruffed and patchy, not sleek like it should be. His ribs were faint outlines beneath a coat meant to keep him warm. He looked right at me, and I mean that. Not past me, not through me, at me. Just for a second, and then he was gone. Now I've seen hundreds of grizzlies in my life. I've been up close with injured ones, tranquilized and tagged, more than I care to count. I've stood still in meadows while a massive boar lumbered past me close enough to hear his breath. But this was different. This one was small, lost, and scared, not in the way animals fear predators, but in the way someone fears they might never feel safe again. You don't need to be a biologist to see fear like that. You just have to have felt it yourself. In the early weeks after my wife passed, I used to sit right there on that same porch. Same position, same cup of coffee going cold in my hands. Wondering what came next. If anything, that cub didn't have a name then. I hadn't earned that right. He wasn't mine. He was just someone else lost in the woods. Still, I showed up. Every day I'd walk the edge of the trees, leave a little food, sit for a while, not moving, not speaking, just letting my presence be known without force. There's a lesson there, I think. Something I didn't learn until much later in life. You can't make someone feel safe by reaching for them. Sometimes you help more by simply being near. Grizzly bear cubs in the wild, especially those who lose their mothers early, don't last long. They either fall prey to predators or wander toward human spaces out of confusion. That's when they get labeled as nuisance bears, trapped, removed, sometimes destroyed. But this cub wasn't looking for trash bins or cabins. He wasn't making noise. He was just surviving. Quietly. I started calling him Milo in my head. Not out loud. That would come later. But I needed something to call him. Not for him, for me. There's something powerful in naming. It makes something real. Rooted. Known. One morning, about 2 weeks after the first sighting, I stepped outside and found something at the edge of the woods. A pine cone. Chewed. Dropped just near the stump where he usually paused. A gift, maybe. Or just a mistake. But in that moment, it felt like a conversation had begun. Sometimes the wilderness offers a mirror. You go looking for nothing and find yourself, or something that needs you quietly, just enough to pull you back toward the world. I didn't rescue him that day. I didn't call the authorities. I just stood there, pine cone in hand, and whispered, "If you come back tomorrow, I'll be here." He did. That was the beginning. Of course, I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know if he'd stay, if he'd ever let me close. I didn't know if this was temporary or if he'd disappear like the others. All I knew was that something in my life had shifted. Gently, quietly. Like a cub in the woods learning to trust the silence again. And so I kept showing up. Every step in the snow. Every breath of cold air. Every creak of the old porch under my boots. I was listening. Because sometimes the world doesn't call with thunder or urgency. Sometimes it starts with a small broken sound just loud enough to interrupt your grief. That was the sound that changed everything. I didn't see him for 3 days after the pine cone. The weather shifted colder, a little harsher. At night, the wind picked up, and I'd find broken branches near the porch come morning. I kept putting the soaked oats in the same place, a shallow metal bowl tucked between the tree roots at the edge of the yard. Sometimes it went untouched. Sometimes it was clean as if licked with care. It's strange what you start looking for when you're waiting for something wild. Not a grand entrance, not even a full silhouette. Just movement, a flash of brown, a twitch of fur behind a log, a pause in the soundscape that means something is watching you. Then came the morning he let himself be seen. It was just past 7. The frost was still clinging to the backs of the chairs on the porch. I stepped out with my coffee, not expecting much. I hadn't slept well the night before. Dreams, memories, you know how they come and go. I stepped off the porch, scanned the woods like I always did, and that's when I saw him. He was crouched near the stump, about 20 feet out, one paw lifted slightly as if unsure of the ground beneath him. His ears were pinned back, eyes wide. You could see every rib under that messy fur, and yet there he was. He didn't move when I did. He didn't run, not right away. We just looked at each other. Not for long, maybe 2 seconds, but it was the kind of stillness that stretches time. A grizzly bear cub alone in Montana's cold timberline, staring down a man with coffee and 100 questions he didn't dare ask. Then he dropped his paw, turned slowly, and disappeared behind the trees. I didn't follow. That's the first rule of wildlife, especially with grizzly bears. You give them space. You don't assert, you don't corner. Even a cub deserves the dignity of retreat. But that glimpse, that tiny, uncertain moment, it cracked something open. Here's what most people don't realize about grizzly bear cubs. They're born tiny, less than a pound at birth. Blind, barely breathing. Barely. They spend the first weeks of life in their mother's den, curled up against her warmth. Everything they know about safety is tied to her scent, her heartbeat, her breath. So when a cub ends up alone before it's ready, its world doesn't just shift, it collapses. There are a few reasons a cub might be alone this time of year. The mother may have been killed sadly, not uncommon when bears venture too close to roads or cabins. She might have rejected the cub if it was sick or weak, or worse, it could be the last survivor of a litter. No one can say for sure. But what I saw in that little bear's eyes wasn't just hunger or fear. It was confusion, the kind that sets in when the rules of your world disappear overnight. And if I'm honest, I knew that feeling too. Grief does that to people. One day you know how to breathe in a house full of life. The next day the silence is so loud you can't sit still in it. You make tea just to hear the kettle boil. You go for long walks in the snow because the quiet outside feels less cruel than the quiet inside. So yeah, maybe I was projecting. Maybe I saw myself in that cub. But what mattered wasn't what I saw, it was what I chose to do with it. That afternoon I moved the bowl of oats just a little closer to the tree line. Not enough to spook him, just enough to say, "I'm still here, kid, if you need me." I added a small piece of cooked salmon from the fridge. Not something I normally would have shared. Salmon's a rare treat out here, but it felt right. Later that day, I sat on the porch with a book I didn't read, glancing up every few minutes like a fool, waiting for a text message that never comes. Right before sunset, I heard the soft crunch of leaves. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Out from the trees he came, tentative, slow. He reached the bowl, sniffed, backed away, waited, then crept forward again. His paws were large, clumsy. You could tell he wasn't old, maybe 6 months, maybe less. He sniffed the oats, then the salmon, ate slowly, pausing every few seconds to look up to freeze. It was the way he moved that broke my heart. Not like a bear, not like an animal that knew the rhythm of the wild, but like something unsure it had the right to exist in this space. Like he expected the world to punish him for accepting kindness. That was hard to watch. In rescue work, we often talk about wildlife trauma. People assume animals don't remember pain or fear or loss the way humans do, but that's wrong. Grizzlies especially, they remember landscapes, smells, threats. They learn fast, and they don't forget. This cub had learned something already: the world was not safe. That first feeding lasted 4 minutes. I timed it. Then he ran. Not spooked, just done. He had reached his limit. That night I sat at the kitchen table with my old journal, flipped back to pages from years ago. A young ranger in Yellowstone helping tag bear cubs with biologists. I remember one in particular lost its mother to a poacher's trap. It took weeks before that little one let us near enough to sedate it for transport. Even then, it fought the whole way. We named that cub Grace. Sometimes the names come easily. This one was Milo. I didn't speak it aloud, but it stuck. Over the next few days, Milo kept returning. Never at the same time, never for long, but he came, ate, watched me, then vanished. One morning, he paused longer than usual. Sat, curled into a ball next to the stump, not sleeping, just resting. I watched from the porch, not moving, not blinking. When he finally stood, he looked at me, not just glanced, looked, then turned and walked away. That was the first time I felt something change. It wasn't big, it wasn't dramatic, but it felt like the start of something honest. Here's the small lesson I'd offer anyone watching this: trust is not a gift, it's not something you're owed. It's something you earn slowly, without asking, without demanding, especially from those who've known loss. The forest has its own rules. Wildlife doesn't need saving in the way people often think, but sometimes offering a safe place, not ownership, not interference, just space, is all it takes for healing to begin. Grizzly bears don't belong in cages. They don't belong in backyards or selfies. They belong in the wild. But when one ends up lost between wilderness and the human world, the best thing we can offer is a choice, not captivity, but sanctuary. That's what I hoped this place could be for Milo. A space to return to if he wanted. A place that said, "You're not alone." The next phase came quietly. He began staying longer. Not approaching me, but not hiding either. He started exploring the clearing near my firewood stack, pawing the dirt, sniffing the porch railings. He didn't climb the steps, not yet, but the fear in his eyes wasn't as sharp anymore. The movements are less frantic, still cautious, but no longer waiting for something bad to happen. He was starting to believe maybe nothing bad would. Maybe. Next, everything would change, not because I invited him in, but because he chose to stay. The porch became my front row seat. Every morning I'd take my coffee and sit in the same chair, angled just enough to see the edge of the clearing without staring directly. I didn't call out, didn't coax. I just sat. That was the agreement, unspoken but clear. Milo would come on his terms or not at all. Trust, like healing, has no shortcuts. That first week he kept his distance. He'd arrive early or late, never at the same time. He ate quickly, eyes darting like every leaf was a threat. Sometimes he wouldn't eat at all, just sniff, freeze, and retreat into the woods. I never followed. I never stood up. I simply watched, and I waited. Waiting was something I was learning all over again. After my wife passed, people used to say, "It just takes time." But they never said how much, or how to use it while you're inside it. Grief stretches time like taffy, long, slow, heavy. You find yourself waiting for a moment that makes sense again. That lands. That matters. Milo was in that moment. Every time he came back, even if just for a minute, it felt like the clock ticked forward, a little at a time. He never got closer than 15 feet that first month. But his body changed. The tension in his shoulders eased. His chewing slowed. He began eating with his back to me. Not completely, but enough to show me something I'd seen in wild animals before he was starting to believe the world might not hurt him again. That's not small. That's survival relearning safety. I began leaving small clues for him, not traps, not challenges, just signals. A piece of apple a little further out. A feather near the bowl. A twig arranged in a small triangle. Not for him to recognize necessarily, but to show that the space he was stepping into had rhythm. That it wasn't random, that it belonged to someone who paid attention. Grizzly bear cubs are deeply observant. It's part of how they survive. They track scent, subtle shifts in wind, foot pressure, and tone of voice. If they trust you enough to linger in your space, it means you've passed 100 quiet tests you didn't even know you were taking. That made me think about people. We tend to focus on the obvious. Big gestures, loud confessions. But most of what builds trust between animals or humans happens in the quiet. In how we pause, how we show up, how we respond when we're not noticed. One evening, just as the last light slipped behind the hills, I saw him doing something new. He was playing, not chasing anything, just batting a stick in the dirt, pawing it, nudging it, flipping it over. I watched from inside the cabin through the kitchen window, barely breathing. That was the first time I saw him, being not surviving, not fearing, just being. Do you know how rare that is for wild animals in uncertain conditions, to feel safe enough to be silly? That's not just progress, that's a breakthrough. I didn't record it, didn't take a photo. That moment wasn't for proof, it was for presence. Still, I wanted to understand more. So I reached out to an old contact, Eleanor, a wildlife biologist I'd worked with back in my ranger days. She specialized in grizzly bear behavior. When I described Milo's size and habits, she told me something that stuck. "Walter, that cub's imprinting on your rhythm," she said. "If he lost his mother early, he's not just learning to eat, he's watching how to exist." That sat with me. It meant every move I made mattered, every noise, every absence. If Milo was learning, then I had to be careful about what I was teaching about trust, about humans, about stillness. So I adjusted. I fixed the creaky porch board near the steps, softened my footsteps on the path, opened windows less often so my voice wouldn't carry and spook him. I turned off the porch light at night, not because he asked, but because I knew light could signal exposure in the wild. It wasn't about taming him. It was about honoring the fact that he was willing to stay. That's a lesson people miss sometimes when they hear stories like this. They think the goal is to bring a wild animal closer. But that's never the point. The point is to build a space where closeness isn't required for connection to happen. That's what sanctuary means. Not a fence, not control, just the freedom to choose safety. Some nights I'd see him come by and not eat. He'd just sniff the air. Sit at the stump, watch the stars. I started leaving a second bowl, just clean water. He drank from it twice, left muddy paw prints on the rim. Each time I cleaned and refilled it like it was a sacred ritual. In a way it was. Meanwhile, the rhythm continued. Each morning I walked the perimeter of the property, made sure nothing had changed. Checked for signs of other animals, elk, coyotes, and once a black bear passing through. I cleared a patch under the shed where Milo liked to nose around. No tools, no traps, no sharp edges. Every step was a quiet cooperation. Over time, I stopped checking whether he'd show up. I just assumed he would. And when he didn't, I noticed it not with panic, but with a strange hollow ache. That's how you know something has changed. When absence no longer feels like a relief, but a question. He never stayed long, never ventured toward the porch. That line, those 5 feet of wood, remained sacred, and I didn't dare cross it for him. He had to choose that. That was the rule. Still, there were signs. He left a tuft of fur on a broken branch near the garden. I found claw marks in the dirt behind the woodpile, gentle ones like he'd been tracing lines, not digging. Once I came outside to find the bowl flipped over, balanced perfectly on its edge. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if he'd done it on purpose. That's the mystery of wild animals. They leave messages you're not always sure how to read. But the bigger mystery is how they manage to change you in the process. The man I was before Milo was quieter, yes, but not peaceful, just quiet, like a house with no one in it. Now, even in the stillness, I felt a kind of presence. A small reminder that somewhere out there something was learning to trust again and letting me be part of it. There's a kind of reverence that grows in those moments. And also a kind of fear. Not fear of the bear, but fear of losing that fragile thread you've built with them. I'd seen it before in rescue centers, volunteers who got too close too fast, who named it too early, who assumed too much. And I'd seen the heartbreak that followed. The wild isn't here to make us feel better about ourselves. It's not here to entertain us. It exists on its terms. If a wild animal lets you in even a little, that's not a pet. That's a privilege, and you'd better treat it like one. Still, the question hung in the air every day. Would he ever cross that line? Would he ever come closer? I didn't know. But one late afternoon, as the sun pulled long gold shadows across the yard, I stepped out to find him sitting at the bottom of the porch steps. Just sitting. His head tilted slightly, nose twitching. He didn't move when I opened the door, didn't run when I sat down. He just looked up at me and then down again, as if to say, I know you now. It didn't last long, a minute, maybe less. Then he stood turned and walked back into the trees. But he'd crossed the invisible line. The one between stranger and maybe. And I knew in that moment the dance was changing. The porch had always been the line. For weeks, that short stretch of wood marked the unspoken boundary between Milo's world and mine. He never crossed it, not even a paw. He'd sit near it, sniff its edge, sometimes lie down just beside the steps, head on his front legs like he was thinking it over, but cross it, never. Until he did. It was just after sunrise, early December. The kind of morning where everything feels slower, softer. Sky is still pale. The frost on the ground hadn't started to melt yet. I was sitting where I always did, second chair, from the left mug of coffee warming my hands more than anything else. He appeared like always, quiet, sudden from the tree line, without sound. I didn't even hear him until I looked up. There he was. But something was different. He wasn't stopping at the stump, wasn't pacing near the woodpile. He walked, deliberate, focused, right up to the porch steps. And paused. We held that stillness together, him and me. Neither of us wanted to move too fast and ruin whatever this was becoming. He looked at me, then at the steps, then back. And then slowly, like the ground might give way, he lifted his paw and placed it on the first step. I didn't move, didn't breathe loudly. My hands rested still on my knees. I dropped my gaze to the floor, not staring, not challenging. That's something you learn around wild animals. Eye contact can be conversation or confrontation depending on the moment. He climbed the first step, then the second. By the third, he was halfway across the porch, not to me, but further than he'd ever dared. He sniffed the air, walked along the edge. His paws tapped the wood softly, each step careful, almost reverent. Like he knew this space wasn't meant for him, but he was being allowed in anyway. He made it to the far corner, curled up, and rested. That's how it happened. No music, no big moment. Just a small creature choosing closeness for the first time. People often think these kinds of milestones come with fanfare. That trust announces itself in some grand way. But that's not how it works. Not with bears, not with people. Trust is quiet. And that morning, trust laid itself down on my porch like a ball of fur and breath. I didn't try to touch him, didn't speak. The silence between us said more than words could have. He stayed for 15 minutes, then stood stretched and left without a sound. But the line had been crossed, and nothing would ever be quite the same. The next day he came back, climbed the steps again. This time he circled once, sat for a while, then left. After that it became routine. Not every day, not always long, but often enough to matter. That porch became our shared space. He'd nap in the same spot each time, always angled slightly toward me. Not facing me, but not turning away either. Like he understood that this was something new, something careful. I started leaving water out just in case. A shallow bowl, nothing fancy. And once I left a small cushion, not because I expected him to use it, but because, I don't know, it felt like something kind to do. He sniffed it, didn't touch it, but didn't reject it either. Here's what I learned. Hospitality, even across species, isn't about comfort, it's about offering safety. That porch wasn't mine anymore. It was ours, a space between wild and human. A middle ground made of patience and repetition. There was a day about 2 weeks in when it snowed heavy, wind loud, branches swaying. I figured he wouldn't show. Most wildlife finds deeper cover in storms like that. But I still made coffee, still took my seat. And just as I was about to head back inside, I heard him. Not a growl, not a sound even, just the shift of weight, the soft creak of the second step. Milo climbed onto the porch, shook the snow from his coat, and lay down like it was the most natural thing in the world. That was the first time I whispered his name. Milo. He didn't flinch, didn't look up, just breathed, like he'd already known it all along. I don't believe in taming wild things. I've seen the cost. I've seen bears lose themselves in human spaces, turned into attractions, props, even threats. That's not what this was. This was coexistence. He came because he chose to, because he felt safe. And every time he stepped onto that porch, it felt like a gift, not an achievement. Sometimes I think about how easy it would have been to ruin it. A sudden move, a loud noise, an assumption. I've seen people ruin delicate things before. Step too fast toward what they want instead of letting it come to them. That's the lesson here. If something wild chooses you, even for a moment, you don't claim it. You protect the space it felt safe in. Over time, I began noticing the way Milo mirrored my movements. If I got up to refill my coffee, he'd stand too. If I stepped outside later than usual, he'd arrive later. Not always, but often enough to feel like rhythm. Animals, like grizzly bears, remember patterns. They build mental maps of behavior. If you're kind, once they note it. If you're kind 10 times, they begin to believe it. If you're kind 100 times, they begin to trust it. That's what Milo was doing. Not bonding in the way a pet bonds, but sinking slowly to a frequency that felt safe. One day I found muddy paw prints on the wooden deck near the door. Not close enough to the handle, but closer than ever before. He was curious, testing the edge of the shared world, not wanting to come inside, just wondering. That's when I built him a shelter. Not a cage, not a kennel, just a small lean-to on the side of the house, open on one end, stuffed with straw and cedar shavings. A place that might feel like a den if he needed it. He sniffed it the first day. Circled, left. On the third day, I found fur inside. He'd used it. Not stayed long, but long enough to leave a trace. And that's when it hit me. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was settling, not permanently, not fully, but enough to mark this place as part of his map. That's what sanctuaries are meant to do, not erase wildness, but support it. To give freedom, boundaries, not fences. To allow healing, not demand dependency. Out here in Montana, we hear stories about baby animals all the time. Lost grizzly bear cubs, black bear rescues. Wildlife sanctuaries help orphaned wildlife find a second chance. But you rarely hear about the quiet ones. The slow stories, the ones that don't go viral. This was one of those. A ball of fur crossing 3 steps, and in doing so, rewriting what both of us thought was possible. You might wonder, where does it go from here? How close can a human and a wild animal get before the line blurs? That's the question that came next. Because one morning I opened the door and he was waiting, not near the steps, not on the porch, but right at the threshold, looking up, not asking to come in, just asking something. And that changed everything. The morning Milo didn't come, I didn't worry. Wild animals come and go. They follow scent, hunger, instinct. Sometimes they vanish for a day or two and reappear like nothing happened. I'd seen it before in other bears, deer foxes, even in the black bear that used to wander through my old ranger post like he was checking in on the neighborhood. So, no, I didn't worry. Not that first day. But the second morning passed, then the third. By the fourth, the porch felt too quiet. His water bowl was untouched. The straw in the lean-to looked undisturbed. The apples I left at the base of the stump hadn't moved. No fresh paw prints in the snow. Nothing. That's when the ache started. Not panic, just something slow and sinking. A heaviness in the center of the chest that doesn't announce itself, just settles in quietly. I walked farther than usual that morning. Past the edge of the clearing. Down the ridge trail we'd once walked side by side. I scanned the trees, listened for movement. Called his name once softly, even though I knew better. Grizzly bears don't respond to names, but I think I needed to hear it out loud, just to know it still belonged somewhere. Milo. Nothing answered but the wind. On the 5th day, I stayed home. Sat on the porch longer than usual, read a few old entries in my ranger log. One from 1993 mentioned a grizzly cub that disappeared after a storm. A volunteer had written, probably moved on, or didn't make it. Either way, nature keeps its calendar. That sentence hit harder than I expected. There's a term in wildlife rescue, soft release. It's when an animal is gradually allowed back into the wild after time in care. You don't force it. You don't hold on too tight. You create a space, offer food, and let it leave when it's ready. The idea is that if it ever needs to return, it knows how. That's what I'd unknowingly offered Milo, a kind of soft release back into the world. The problem is, no one tells you how hard it is to wait when they're gone. By day 6, the stillness started to feel different. Not peaceful anymore, just hollow. My routines remained the same: coffee porch wait. But there was a dull edge to every movement, like I was going through the motions hoping to trigger a memory. I swept the porch even though it wasn't dirty. Refilled the water bowl though no one was drinking. Sat in silence so long that the kettle on the stove would whistle before I realized I'd never poured the water. Loss can return like that, quietly, in small delays, in the undone tasks. The question kept circling in my mind. Had I done something wrong? Was I too consistent, not consistent enough? Had I made him dependent, or worse, had I made him vulnerable? It's a fine line with wildlife. You want to offer refuge, but not interference. Support, but not ownership. You want them to trust you as not so much that they forget how to be wild. Still, I kept thinking, what if I made him too comfortable? What if he stopped avoiding danger because he thought people were safe? On day 7, I hiked further, took the trail east along the creek bed where I once found his tracks in mud. I looked for signs. Broken branches, fur on bark scat, anything. I found nothing. But I did find silence. The kind that presses against your skin. The kind that doesn't give answers. On the way back, I stopped at the small grove just behind the cabin. It was where I used to walk with my wife. A simple loop about 20 minutes. We'd talk or not talk, pick up pine cones, sometimes sit on the big rock near the center and drink thermos coffee. I hadn't been back there in a long time. That day I went, and I brought the thermos. I sat on that rock, steam rising between my hands, and I let myself say it out loud. I miss you. I didn't mean just her. I meant both of them. Loss is strange that way. It doesn't stay in separate boxes. It layers, compounds, echoes. And sitting there, I realized something I hadn't admitted until then. I had let him in. Not just onto the porch. Into my routines, into my sense of purpose, into that quiet part of me that had stopped expecting to be needed. That's the danger of healing. It makes you hope again. And hope when shaken can feel like betrayal. But maybe this wasn't about me at all. Maybe this was Milo's journey. Maybe he had found what he needed and simply moved on. Maybe that's the goal in animal sanctuary work, to make yourself unnecessary. Still, that night I left the lean-to open, changed out the straw, laid an old wool blanket in the corner. Not because I expected him back, but because I wanted the choice to still exist for him. The next morning, I opened the door to find the water bowl knocked over, just slightly. Snow disturbed near the edge. No tracks, too much wind overnight. But the bowl, it wasn't where I left it. I bent down, turned it over. One small claw mark on the side. It wasn't proof, but it was enough. I stood there for a long time watching the tree line. No movement, no Milo, but something in me settled. Just a little. Because even if he wasn't ready to stay, he remembered the way back. That's all any of us can hope for sometimes, that someone remembers where the safe places are. Later that week, I got a call from Eleanor, the biologist. I'd left her a voicemail days before asking about dispersal patterns in orphaned grizzly cubs. She told me this time of year, if he's healthy enough, he might be trying to find new ground. Cubs that learn how to self-regulate early have a better chance. You probably did more than you know. I hung up the phone and sat with that. Maybe I did do something right. Or maybe I just did enough. A few days later, 10 in total, he came back. Not for long. Just a few minutes, long enough to eat, to drink, to sit on the porch. Not curled up this time, just upright, alert, steady. I didn't speak. He didn't look at me. But when he left, he didn't run. He walked, like someone who knew exactly where he was. He came back. That alone was enough. After those 10 long days, Milo's return even briefly felt like a door reopening. Not one I controlled, one he chose to unlock. I didn't make a sound when I saw him at the edge of the clearing, just exhaled slowly. He walked up the porch steps like he always had, not rushed, not shy, like the time away had reminded him of something. He didn't lie down, didn't stay long, but before he left, he nudged the water bowl upright with his paw, something he'd never done before. And that's when I realized. This place wasn't just safe, it was familiar. Over the next few weeks he came more often, not every day, but enough to build a rhythm again. I stopped trying to count the gaps, stopped wondering whether he'd stay. I just paid attention to the days he did. There's a shift that happens when an animal stops visiting and starts returning. It's subtle, but it's there. He began doing things he had never done before, following me not close, but with interest. When I walked the path toward the river, he sometimes trailed 30 feet behind, head low, sniffing the prints I left. When I paused, he'd pause. When I turned back, he'd veer off, never too near, never too far. He also started exploring around the cabin. I'd find overturned leaves near the woodshed, scratches on the logs of the lean-to. One day I stepped outside to see him nosing at the pile of split wood, lifting pieces one at a time like he was inspecting my work. It felt like he was learning the shape of this place, making it his own. And so I built something for him, just beyond the clearing where the tall grass met the edge of the old aspen grove. I laid the foundation for a small wildlife shelter. Nothing elaborate. 4 sturdy beams, sloped roof, open sides, inside a layer of dry straw and cedar. I made it big enough for a grizzly bear cub to stretch out, but not so big that it felt unnatural. I didn't place food inside. No bait, just base. It took him 4 days to get near it. The 5th day I found paw prints along the entry. Deep ones, pacing. By the 7th he was sleeping there. I never saw him go in, but the evidence was clear, compressed straw, shed fur warmth still lingering in the air. He had claimed it, not as property, but as part of his path. And in doing so, something shifted again. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was settling. There's something profound about watching a wild animal return to the same place, not because it's trapped or fed or controlled, but because it feels right. Natural. Safe. That's the difference between animal rescue and animal sanctuary. Rescue is urgent, immediate. It saves a life. But sanctuary is what happens after, when safety becomes something soft enough to rest in. Milo began to rest, and I began to breathe easier. One morning I woke to find him lying on the porch, still as a statue, paws, tucked eyes closed. He wasn't curled tight like before. He was stretched out, exposed, relaxed. That kind of vulnerability is rare in wild animals, especially grizzly bears, especially ones who've known loss. I sat down next to the screen door and just watched. Not as a ranger, not as a rescuer, as someone lucky enough to be trusted. We shared more mornings like that. Sometimes I'd talk barely above a whisper. Sometimes I'd sip coffee and read aloud from old journals. I don't know if he listened, but he stayed, and that was enough. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and cast long shadows across the cabin wall, I lit the fire pit out back. I hadn't used it since before my wife passed. It just felt unnecessary, I guess. But that night, I needed the warmth, the ritual. Milo didn't come close, but I saw him, just beyond the edge of the light, sitting, watching the flames, and something about that moment struck me. 2 living beings, neither whole, neither lost, sharing the same flame from opposite ends of grief. I'd been alone in these woods for months, years if I'm honest, not physically, just emotionally, detached, numb. But Milo had brought something back. Not noise, not companionship in the traditional sense, just presence. And in that presence, the sanctuary stopped being just his. It became ours. Sometimes I wonder what the world would look like if more people understood the kind of healing that happens in silence, in stillness, in watching without needing to change what you see. There's a temptation, especially when we see young, fragile creatures, to want to fix everything, to wrap them up, bring them inside, make them part of our world. But true connection isn't about pulling someone into your life. It's about building a space where both can meet freely. Milo never became tame. He never let me touch him, never followed commands, never made me feel like I was in control. And that's what made it real, because he chose this place. And in choosing it, he taught me that home isn't where you live, it's where you return to when the world gets too loud. By late December, he was spending most nights nearby, not always visible, but close enough that I'd hear his soft movements. A grunt, a shifting paw. Sometimes just his breath in the cold air. I stopped locking the gate to the back trail, left it slightly open like a quiet invitation. He never crossed into the cabin, but once, just once, I left the door cracked while I was cooking, and I swear for a split second I saw his nose appear in the doorway, sniff, then vanish. Not ready, but curious. That's enough. I started keeping track of the little things. The times he stayed longer. Days he arrived earlier. What he seemed to like apples more than oats. Dry straw more than blankets. No sudden noises. And I shared those stories. With neighbors. With a local wildlife sanctuary that had heard rumors about a grizzly cub in the area. I told them I wasn't trying to keep him, just to be part of his healing. They understood. Sanctuary, after all, isn't about ownership. It's about offering something without asking for anything in return. And for both of us, I think that space became holy. That winter, something new happened. One morning I stepped out and Milo was already there, sitting by the fire pit where the embers had long gone out. Waiting. Not for food, not for shelter. Just waiting. Like this was his place to begin the day. That's when I knew he wasn't a visitor anymore. He was family. By the time January settled in, Milo's presence wasn't a surprise anymore. It was expected, a part of the rhythm. I'd wake, step out with coffee, look to the edge of the clearing, and most days there he'd be, either arriving or already settled. Sometimes by the woodpile, sometimes beneath the old pine where the snow collected in drifts. He never asked for anything. He just was solid, soft quiet. And I started noticing something else. I'd changed, not drastically, not overnight, but slowly, the way snow reshapes a landscape not with force, but with consistency. Where once I filled my days with routine just to outrun the quiet, now I move more slowly, more present. I wasn't listening for anything anymore. I was just listening. Milo taught me that. Not through action, through being. A grizzly bear cub, lost orphaned, half-starved, had somehow become the most grounding presence in my life. And the irony, I thought I was the one helping him. That's how it starts, isn't it? You think you're offering shelter. Food, a bit of safety. You think you're the sanctuary. But over time you realize you needed saving too. Not from danger, from drift, from dullness. From the kind of quiet that doesn't calm, just isolates. Milo gave that quiet shape, gave it company. And in doing so, it reminded me what healing looks like. Not recovery, not a clean slate, but choosing to show up again, choosing to return even when you could disappear. I remember one morning I overslept, just for an hour. But when I stepped out, Milo was already at the porch, pacing lightly. He paused when he saw me, then sat down, as if to say, "You're late." But I waited. That morning I sat on the top step, not far from him, close enough that I could hear him breathe. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, this wild, powerful animal who could one day grow to 500 pounds, who still carried the softness of something not yet finished. And I thought, what would the world be like if we offered each other this kind of patience, because that's what this was. Milo never asked me to be anyone but who I was. He didn't need me to fix the past. He didn't want a version of me that smiled through grief or pretended to be fine. He just wanted presence and offered it back. You can't buy that. You can't train it. You can't even earn it. You just received it. It made me think about people, how often we ask for things. Time, attention, love, but don't know how to give quiet, how to hold space, how to sit beside pain without trying to patch it up. Milo never tried to fix me. He just came back, again and again. That was the lesson. Consistency without demand. Presence without pressure. Comfort without possession. One evening I stood by the edge of the sanctuary. We'd built the small shelter near the grove. The sky had turned the kind of pink that doesn't last, that slips away before you can name it. Milo was inside, curled against the straw, his breath visible in the cold. I didn't go in. I just stood outside watching. And I whispered, "Thank you." Not because he needed to hear it, because I needed to say it. I used to think animal sanctuaries were for animals. Now I'm not so sure. Maybe they're for all of us. Maybe we all need a place where we're allowed to arrive broken. Where can we test the ground beneath us before we lie down? Where we can choose when to speak and when to sit in silence. A place where no one asks us to be anything more than alive. That's what this patch of Montana forest had become. Not just a safe place for a grizzly bear cub to grow, but a quiet corner of the world where two very different beings figured out how to exist beside each other without needing to explain why, and in doing so became less alone. There's a photo I keep now, not framed, not shared online, just tucked into the inside flap of my old Ranger log. It's of Milo taken with a trail camera, standing beside the water bowl one early morning, head tilted, a soft light cutting across his back. There's nothing dramatic in it, no movement, no story. But to me, it's everything. Because that's the moment I realized he had chosen to be there. And that choice, it's more powerful than any rescue. I've worked in wildlife rescue before. I know what it means to intervene, to save, but this was different. This wasn't me saving Milo. This was us finding something we both needed and didn't have the words for. Sanctuary. Not a place, a bond, a rhythm, a quiet agreement that said, I see you. You don't have to stay. But if you do, this space is yours too. And Milo. He stayed. Not every day, not always in sight, but enough. Enough to shift how I saw the world. Enough to remind me that wild animals, like people, carry memories. And if we're lucky, they let us into them. That's what this whole journey has been. A slow entry into memory. His and mine. You'd think the biggest lessons come from people, or books, or structured grief groups with coffee and folding chairs. But no. Some of the most important things I've learned came from a bear cub with a hesitant walk and a quiet soul. Things like, you don't need to say much to be trusted. Safety isn't created by locking doors, it's created by leaving them open. Healing doesn't happen when you expect it. It happens when you're busy showing up for someone else. That's what Milo taught me. Every time he stepped onto the porch. Every time he nudged a bowl upright. Every time he followed at a distance, then chose to stay. And the beautiful thing, he never asked me to teach him anything. He just was. And through being, he gave me back pieces of myself I didn't know were still missing. Grief is strange. It clears out whole rooms in your life, then locks the doors behind you. You forget there were even windows, forget the way light used to look. But then something or someone comes along. Doesn't kick the door in, doesn't even open it, just sits outside, waits, and eventually, you open it yourself. That's what Milo did, by existing, by returning, by resting just outside the places I thought I'd closed forever. That's how we became family. It's been a year now since Milo first appeared. He's not a cub anymore, not quite. He's taller, stronger, and more confident in his walk. His coat is thick, his shoulders broader. The roundness of baby animals is starting to give way to the muscle of maturity. But he still moves with caution, still circles before settling, still stops sometimes at the base of the porch like he's checking to see if things are still the same. And they are. Every morning, I still step outside with my coffee. I still glance toward the trees. I still wait without expectation. Sometimes he comes, sometimes he doesn't. And I've learned to be okay with both. That's what a forever home is, not a place where someone stays forever, but a place they know they can return to whenever they need it. That was the shift I didn't see coming. In my early days as a ranger, we were taught how to assess habitat, food, water, shelter, and space. Those were the elements that made a space suitable for wildlife. But no one ever talked about the one thing that makes it home. Memory. That's what keeps an animal coming back. That's what keeps people coming back too. And Milo remembers. You can see it in the way he walks the same path through the brush. The way he noses the edge of the lean-to before lying down. The way he pauses at the water bowl like it holds some quiet importance. This sanctuary became more than just a safe space for a grizzly bear. It became part of his internal map. And in a different way, part of mine too. We didn't plan for this. I didn't wake up one morning and say I'm going to open my life to a wild animal. He didn't step into the clearing looking for a human to trust. But something in both of us was searching, whether we knew it or not, for connection. for rhythm, for proof that something in the world still made sense. In that way, this wasn't just a story about animal rescue. It wasn't about taming or teaching or turning a grizzly bear into something soft and safe for human comfort. It was about remembering how to exist beside wildness without needing to change it. About understanding that not all relationships need to be owned to be real. We are so used to thinking in binaries, wild or domestic, in or out, safe or dangerous. But the truth is, real life exists in the space between, and that's where Milo and I found each other. I remember a night not long ago, late spring, stars out, no wind. I had walked out to check the shelter, not expecting anything, but he was there, lying on his side, eyes closed, breathing slowly, and next to him, just a few inches away, sat a pine cone, placed there carefully. I don't know if he did it. Maybe it rolled in. Maybe it was a chance. But it reminded me of the very first pine cone I found back when he was still a ghost in the trees. Back when I wasn't sure if I could love anything again without losing it. It felt like a circle closing. Milo doesn't stay every night anymore. He roams, he explores. He's still a wild animal with a wild animal's instincts. But when he comes back, when I see those brown eyes across the clearing, calm and certain, I feel something settle inside me that nothing else ever has. A kind of peace. And that's the lesson I carry forward. Not every rescue ends in release. Some end in return. Some teach you that the point of sanctuary isn't permanence, it's freedom. It's the freedom to heal without being watched. To grow without being controlled. To leave without fear and to come back without shame. That's what we built here. A wildlife sanctuary, yes, but also something quieter, something deeper. A rhythm, a trust. A place where a grizzly bear cub could grow into himself without forgetting where he came from. And where an old man could remember what it means to be present. It's easy to talk about wild animals in numbers. Populations, conservation stats, endangered lists. But every once in a while, one comes into your life and teaches you that these aren't just data points. They're stories, personal ones, the kind you carry long after the paw prints have faded. I don't know how long Milo will keep coming back. Maybe one day he won't. Maybe one spring he'll follow a different scent, find a new valley, start his path. And if that day comes, I'll be okay. Because he left something behind. And maybe I left something with him too. There are nights now when I sit by the fire pit, the same one we once shared in silence, and feel a kind of stillness I never knew I needed. No ache, no waiting, just being. I think about the things he taught me, that healing isn't a finish line, it's a loop. That showing up is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. That presence matters more than words. That love, real unspoken love, can exist without ownership. That every creature, no matter how small or scared, deserves a second chance. Maybe even a third. And maybe that applies to us too. So if you've made it this far, if you've walked with us through these moments, I have one question for you. What would your version of a sanctuary look like? Not for animals, for you. What would it mean to stop chasing answers and just sit quietly, even when nothing makes sense? What might change if you showed up not to fix, not to save, but simply to be present for someone or something finding its way back? Maybe your Milo doesn't have fur. Maybe it's a memory, a person, a piece of yourself you thought was lost in the woods. But if this story has meant something to you, if it stirred something quiet or reminded you that the world can still hold beauty, then I hope you'll do one small thing. Look for the Milo in your own life. Wait for him, watch for him, don't force it, and when he shows up, because somehow, some way he will be ready, let him come as he is, and if you can, leave the door open. Ka.